started to take the regulations from the Department of Justice and the impacts on utilizing other types of mobility devices on state game lands for people with disabilities. Throughout the process, learned quite a bit, and we reviewed some different ideas from staff, reached out to some disabled hunters that were looking at other states, other regulations, so got a lot of good from them. And this is the culmination, is what you have in front of you. So one of the things that you see in front of you is the standard operating procedure, and the other thing is the proposed rulemaking or regulations. We also allowed some public comment, some opportunities over the course of about 6 weeks last fall for public comment. That went really well. Heard from a small subset of disabled hunters, but even got a good feel for what hunters in general are looking for access to state game lands. Some said we absolutely don't want any access, however we understand some more access for disabled hunters, and others said we need to get into our favorite hunting spot a little easier. So it was pretty much all across the board, but it gave us a good idea of what hunters were thinking about, feeling about access to state game lands. So brief overview on the OPDMD use on state game lands or other powered mobility devices. Right now, a hunter is limited to an ATV, and we all know that a hunter that is truly disabled, it's a challenge for that individual to get on an ATV, to shift the ATV, and do all the things necessary for them to be able to get back in and hunt safely and effectively on state game lands. So part of the rulemaking is looking at the types of devices, giving them weight, length, width, things like that, so that we can make sure that environmentally we're doing the right thing. We're giving hunters greater opportunity, and we're protecting our resource, state game lands. So we're taking all those factors into account. There's also a decibel regulation in there about the type of sound or the amount of sound that it will emit on site, which I think is a tremendous factor, because if you live anywhere where there's ATVs running around, there's always that one person that wants to have the loudest ATV going, kind of like, the loudest motorcycle on the block. So we're trying to prevent that as well. There's some speed restrictions in place, because remember, these things are supposed to take the place of an individual's ability to move, to walk. So that's why we've got its relatively low speed. Right now it's listed as 3 miles per hour. Part of the intent of that is if this person needs to have additional assistance above and beyond, to assist them to drive the machine for them, that those other individuals will be able to walk right alongside them or behind them. And again, that person is not given any advantage over other hunters, but it definitely levels the playing field for those individuals. These things have gone back out to staff for further comment, for review, gone up to the executive office. Legal has given it their blessing at this point. Feel that it certainly handles all of the issues with Department of and so we're here today just giving you an update and overview as to where we've come to. Any questions?
What about electronic vehicles, golf carts?
Yes.
They've come such a long way.
They have.
I just want to make sure that we can open it up to that. There's no noise, there's no sound.
Right.
It's probably an easier fix for us.
Right. If you look at again, the weight limitation, the width limitation,
right,
they all, unless someone goes to try to get some hot shot, extra wheel extensions on or whatever, all of those pieces of equipment will fit the existing regulations.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure we included them, because ideally we would want to drift everybody in the direction of
sure,
the electric types of golf cart
sure,
systems that are out
sure,
there. They've got extended battery life now. They've got all-wheel drive. They're extremely effective and efficient at doing what their intended purpose is.
right.
What is our current width limit? The current width limit is?
The current width limit, I don't think there is one. I think it's restricted to an outright ATV.
It's pretty narrow.
It is pretty narrow.
Because I know I had a lot of questions about the side-by-sides.
So this will be, allowing the door to be open for those types of side-by-sides. And the important part about this is our self-evaluation assessment process that took place. The existing disabled hunter type of trails that are there, Obviously, we're going to have to widen those gates a little bit to allow the side-by-sides to get in there, and that's a width of a maximum of 65 inches. But those other areas that people want to access, they can apply through the special use permit process. We'd evaluate that specific road for that specific individual and that type of piece of equipment. So we didn't just open up every single road and gate all across the game lands, because to be quite honest with you, there's a lot of places that people don't care about accessing.
Yeah.
So why open up all those roads and gates for everybody? Because once we have that opening there, everybody on an ATV or UTV is going to try to go through that gate, creating an absolute disaster for us at times. So this will give those people the opportunity to go out, get a special use permit, get the combination for that specific gate, and they'd obviously have to open and close the gate once they go through, and then they continue on their way and go hunting for the day. So it gives them greater flexibility, it gives us a greater opportunity, and when that individual decides, well, maybe they're not going to hunt, or they're going to hunt someplace else, that gate isn't opened up in perpetuity for that, one set of tire tracks that you may see go through them every 10 years. So there's a lot of options, I think, that are available for hunters that we haven't had in the past. Hopefully we can keep these guys out there hunting, enjoying our tradition with their family and friends, and at the same time protecting and safeguarding the game lands, which are obviously very sacred to us.
I think that's a good solution.
I had a question the other day on the electric assisted bicycle. There's a bicycle, you have to pedal it in park, but there's a list on it that makes that pedaling that much easier.
Right.
The question was not in reference to handicapped persons. The question was in reference
To able-bodied persons.
able-bodied persons putting them on the game lands or putting them on the game line road.
Now, as far as handicapped persons go, they would obviously fit the definition, because they're under the weight limit, the width limit, and all of those things, which are fine, because if someone had a recent hip replacement or something, and they just needed to be able to have help them go, that to the places that they enjoy, then that would be acceptable.
The question I would be asked was, currently you can use a bicycle,
Yes,
but can you use an electric assisted bicycle? Not at this point.
not at this point. That's where the line gets crossed.
So how do you prove the guy was using it? I'm just, listen. The guy
It could be
pedaling down the
challenging.
road, how do you know?
It could be challenging, but if he by, and hasn't moved his feet in quite some time, I think we'd be able to figure that one out.
And they had them up at the elk range, at the elk festival. I think that's where the thought came in, and looks like a regular bike, and it's got a little lengthy battery. It's about that long,
Sure, I've seen him.
and looked pretty good to me.
Yeah. Ironically, I was out west this year, and it was really to see that at Mount Rushmore there was an individual that obviously had problems walking, and he had a Segway. And that's the first time I've seen that. But his family was walking alongside him, but he was on a Segway and just creeping along at probably 1.5 miles to 2 miles an hour right with him. But I guess as far as him being able to ambulate on his own was just not going to happen.
Right.
And he worked his way all the way up. We were at Mount Rushmore, took a look at the whole site there. It was pretty impressive to see how that really operates in practice. Something I've never seen before.
Could he drag a deer there?
Probably not.
I mean, there's a lot of technology coming out now that, because our population as a whole is aging, so I think we're going to see a lot of that come out, and we have to be able to adapt somewhat to it as even the population of aging hunters. We don't want to discourage them from going back in, so we need to make it easier for them to get there. During the hunting season, open those roads up to get them further back into the game land, so they don't have to walk 3 miles to get in.
Right. Well, and a big positive has been, in a lot of cases, the deer hunter focus areas. And the regions, we're looking at these places strategically to get hunters just that little further back in, hopefully harvest a few additional deer from some of those places. And it wasn't, the direction there was not go out and open all of your gates. That is the right message. I think that actually negatively impacts deer hunting in a lot of cases because they get so squirrely and move out so quickly. But I think good strategic locations that are open to allow hunters to get, to those places that right now are just out of reach. I think that's an important component of this as well.
So while we're on gates, maybe this is the time to ask. We've had some discussions, and being up at the Elk Festival over the past weekend, what came up was, how do we get hunters in to get these things out of there? Can we make it easier for guys that have harvested elk to maybe contact the commission where they would go and open a gate and take them back in there to remove, not physically remove it themselves, but to give them a hand anyway, getting back to the animal, to have it removed without having to drag it through miles.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that we've been talking about a little bit recently was game retrieval roads. Places for, the only person that could go in there would be an individual that was going to retrieve a lawfully harvested animal. Anybody else that gets in there gets a ticket.
Right.
But I think there is some value in those places, whether they've got an elk or even deer or a bear.
Outfitters go in and they can help bring the elk out?
Well, that's what I mean. If we have a game retrieval type, to give them access into these places, and we identify those places that, perennially, there's a lot of hunters in certain areas. And I think of like archery season, even if I ride my bike in there or I walk 3 miles in, to know that I have an opportunity, rather than get home at 11 o'clock at night, but be able to drive in there after I harvest
Sure,
an animal
sure.
and get it. I think there's a lot of value to our hunters
I
with
believe
that.
so. I mean,
So there may be some opportunity to take a hard look at that. Again, strategically, those main thoroughfares, those strategic places that we can allow hunters to know that all I've got to do is get my deer that 1/4 mile or 1/2 mile to the main road,
Right.
and then I can drive in there and get it.
And specifically during the elk hunt, the first week anyway, it would be, because it's so controlled and there's such a limited number of tags
Sure.
and a limited number of hunters. I mean, the key would be just to get in touch with one of the game commission vehicles and allow that, that WCO or land manager or whoever to go in with them.
Just escort them in.
And escort them in, and then escort them out, and then, it makes it simple, and I think it just helps a lot, and it's good, it's good PR.
We're
Absolutely.
visiting the kill sites anyhow, so
Yeah, correct,
somebody's
that's
coming in
what
there
I'm
one
saying.
way or another.
We are.
Now you know exactly where it's at.
And I can tell you, over the years in Monroe County, there was numerous times where we opened gates up because bears were 600-700 pounds. It was going to be a challenge to
Right.
get them out any other way, and ruining the hide and et cetera.
Right.
So yeah, there was a lot of opportunities to allow those hunters to go in there and retrieve their animals.
Good.
So
Well,
it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad we're looking at that, because I think it's long overdue.
Is that something that could be looked at with a recommendation for the September meeting for elk season coming up?
Something as simple as that really could be handled between
Yeah, exactly.
us and the regional
Regional
directors.
director
Yeah.
worried about that.
Yeah, because it's simple.
Yeah,
and
just
you-
an SOP.
And you can
I was gonna
communicate
say,
with all
it's-
those people.
It's just a simple SOP,
And I believe they've been doing a fair amount of that over the last few years. I know that even last year, Matt was in on several sites,
He drug a
opening
couple
gates
out,
and
yeah.
helped drag a few out,
yeah.
and, bring them back up to the check station.
A couple of years ago, we did that, and the WCO was a little hesitant, and I said, well, if you get in trouble, just tell them I told you to.
Right.
And we helped the crew get back. And they were all sitting in the parking lot. There was a half a dozen of them, and they had an elk down 3 miles back in, and, they were waiting for those guys to drag it out while they're all sitting in the parking lot. I said, look, load them all up in one pickup truck and, tell them to get back here and
makes
give them
sense.
a hand, so.
It makes them real happy hunters when you help
It
them
did, I'll
drag it
tell
out.
you,
Oh, yeah.
there was a lot of thank yous back at the check station, so.
Mhm.
Worked out well.
Well, there's 7 miles between the gate on the railroad there.
Sure,
Food and Cover used to go and help guys bring them out.
sure, yeah.
So they're in the middle of that, go long.
And that helps at certain times, but, archery season, 6 weeks, and when you're, last light, you're finishing things up, and now it's the 4-mile hike out,
Right.
then the cart, and the 4-mile hike back in. I've spent a few late nights doing that.
And you're gonna get better hunter use of those areas, because I know myself, I got a line, I'll shoot a
There's
buck
only
past
four,
this
yeah.
line, I'm not shooting a doe back there.
Sure.
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
I
good
gotta
point.
drag it out, it's not worth it.
Good point. Yeah, we'll take a look at that with the regions and move forward from there.
I think it's a very good flexible policy, I think it, you might find you're gonna adjust it later, but I think it's
Sure.
it was a pretty difficult, challenging problem to solve. How are we gonna make
Right.
everything work? And I think you really captured what you need to.
Well, we worked hard at it, you know, and we had a lot of regional input, other bureau input, and we came up with this, and I think it's gonna, again, protect the game lands, give these hunters greater access, and meet the objectives that the Department of Justice laid out, you know, when they came out with this a few years ago.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, wildlife management. Tim's still crying?
Yeah,
Tim's still crying?
I told him it's being recorded, we'll get him a recording. Good morning.
Hey, how's the daughter doing?
Good.
She coming back yet?
No, I went down to see her though. This weekend, she sprained her ankle really bad
Oh, yeah?
a week and a half ago, so she's in a boot, kind of hobbled.
Ah,
Oh, we got the whole crew.
Yeah. Good morning. We have just 3 or 4 items on the agenda for our bureau this morning. Kathy, you're going to give us an update on the wildlife diversity program. We'll focus on piping plovers. I'll give a brief update on the pheasant propagation program. Dr. Brown's going to give us an update on EHD and deer. And Dr. Laval will give us an update on a proposal to provide a junior trapping opportunity for beaver. So with that, take it away.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much for the opportunity to kind of do a very brief update on the 400 protected species that are within the Game Commission's charge. And we're, of course, particularly pleased to bring a good news story. And I'll leave all the details to Kathy, who has queued up a PowerPoint. Of course, in this case, you know, we initiated habitat work some years ago with the specific intent to bring back an endangered species, and that was successful. Of course, sometimes it's not habitat work, and as we know, all eagles recovered because of conservation efforts that weren't really habitat related, and you know, the ongoing. Can't hear me?
There, now.
Okay, thanks. And ongoing issues with bats, which I'm not really going to touch on, but is summarized in a book that one of our staff, Greg Turner, was an editor of. So a summary of what we know about bats. And you have to host these sort of a state of the knowledge at various times. At some future point, we can give an update on the actions that we're doing to recover bat populations. And there's a little bit of good news. We'll save that for another time. So in the meantime, you know, we're very pleased, and Kathy Hafner will be giving some background. She actually worked on plovers before coming to the Game Commission. So we were positioned in all kinds of ways to address this species. And go ahead, Kathy, give us the story.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share a great success story. You know, we do have them. We certainly have a lot of success stories, but this one is particularly fun and personal for me. As Dan said, that I worked on piping plovers in the Great Lakes region. It's one of 3 populations of piping plovers. This is a endangered population, very small, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. But for 4 years, I was working in the field on recovery efforts, leading recovery efforts, and researching them. So when I moved to Pennsylvania in 2004 and ultimately met Dan, you know, it was really Dan who was the catalyst, I have to say, for this focused attention on bringing what was once an extirpated species in Pennsylvania, native to Pennsylvania, no longer breeding in this state. Newsflash, of course, you may have seen the news release already, but we had 2 pairs of piping plovers nesting in Pennsylvania this year. This was first time in more than 60 years that we had this nesting endangered species, with 2 wild chicks reared and fledged. And it's very hard to see, but that's kind of on purpose. I wanted to show that there are 2 chicks there in the photo, and it's kind of like celebrating the success of this first hatching of piping plovers in Pennsylvania. The waves were coming up and jeopardizing the second nest. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's why we have 2 captive reared chicks that fledged in Michigan this year. But a tremendously successful season, And it really is thanks to all of the folks in the core of the range of piping plovers in Michigan, primarily, and also Wisconsin, and more recently Canada. All of those efforts, all of the hard work and dedication put into protecting each nest, because it's such an imperiled population, to rear the chicks that then came to Pennsylvania to colonize our shores. So this was, we share this success not only with all the fantastic partners in Pennsylvania, but also the range of the Great Lakes plovers. In Pennsylvania, though, we've been working for over a decade, and we'll talk about that in a moment, how we got to this day. But briefly, I'd like to just recognize all of the individuals that helped to make this whole effort successful over the years. And we had great coordination among, DCNR state parks, where, of course, the pipe nested, and they had been working towards this as well. Their park management plan had recognized piping plovers, and the fact that they once nested there, up to 15 nesting pairs were once at Presque Isle State Park. So they were also thinking about it. And then we have the picture, the main picture there, Mary Birdsong on the far left in the white hat. She was the shorebird monitor that was hired to go out day after day and monitor for the birds. She was there, she was the one who detected them. She watched them doing a territorial display and alerted us. And, she had just amazing dedication to go through this, the trail to Gull Point was actually closed to the public this year because it was flooded by Lake Erie. The water's very high this year, and Lake Erie took over the trail. So she was going through with, chest waders every day to find them. That was really remarkable. And then also recognize Tim Hoppy, who's, I wish I had a pointer, I apologize, but I'm over there in the blue shirt, and he's standing next to me. He's our Northwest regional biologist, and he really helped this effort tremendously by being able to, thanks. Great, so there's Tim. Being able to bring the boat, he rescued the eggs from the second nest. I mean, tremendous effort. So, and Tracy Graziano here, who we all know, our filmmaker, was helping to document the activity, and she's working on documentaries that you'll see later this year. So, tremendous effort, and great thanks to everybody involved. Thanks, Mary. So who are these birds? The young males are colonizers of new sites, and that was true here in Pennsylvania. The male this is the male here, he actually came to Presque Isle last year, to Gull Point, was doing territorial displays last year trying to find a mate. Unfortunately, for some reason, females are in short demand in the population. He wasn't able to acquire a mate last year. However, this year he was successful. So he's a 2-year-old male who was born in Michigan, North Manitou Island. If you haven't been to Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. And this female, who is, she's 1 to 2 years old. We don't know because the bands, these are color band combinations, and we only give them a brood marker, so we don't know exactly who they are. But she may have visited Gull Point in 2016 as a migrant, which is interesting, that these young birds, as they migrate south to wintering grounds, are checking out some potential sites. And I have a little video here, thanks to Tracy Graziano. Let's see. And so this is just a short video clip of the behaviors of the piping plovers, which is kind of fun to see because we haven't seen this in more than 60 years in the state. All right, so here we have the male. This is the courtship behavior. So he's scraping now. Their nests are just small scrapes in the sand, essentially, and they'll be lined with cobble. And now he's doing a pebble tossing display, and there's a female sitting behind, and you can't see her, but she'll pop up in a second. As he goes over, and this is a precopulatory goose stepping behavior. And there she pops up, and
Effective footwork.
yeah. It's really fun to see that. Yeah, so that, you know.
Should cut it just a few seconds earlier.
Out loud.
Fun to watch. Old female from Osage Beach, Ontario. So we had some young birds from Canada visiting us. And this is the nest that was washed out. We don't have a picture of the female, but what's pictured here are the eggs that are that were rescued and brought to the Michigan Captive Rearing Center. And here's just a quick video of the chicks in the captive rearing facility in Michigan. And the green, this is one of ours, the green band. They're only a few days old here. So this is the indoor enclosure. Our chicks are the green banded one and the red banded one. So here they are outside enjoying some time on the shores of Douglas Lake at the Michigan Biological Station. And there are a few other chicks there. There's one of ours, the red banded one. They were released, they were raised to fledging and released along Michigan. Here they are, a little bit older chicks. This is the outdoor pen where they can forage along the shores of Douglas Lake. So they were released at the beginning of August. So this is just a map of where they came from, North Manitou Island in Michigan, and 2 sites in Ontario. So the 2 sites in Ontario weren't too far away. So what led us to this success? It really was the culmination of sound science, effective conservation planning, and then of course our implementation and monitoring the population. So essentially adaptive management. We had to understand what the species required, the limiting factors to that population, plan for it, understand what we had to do, implement it, and know that we were successful. So that started back when the piping plovers were listed in 1986. My graduate advisor, Francie Cuthbert, really conducted a lot of this research, and this is why we know so much about piping plovers like we do. So this led to all of the recovery strategies being developed, such as restricting human activities on beaches, putting up mid-sized exclosures over piping plovers' nests to protect the egg. Just have a short clip of us putting up a mid-sized exclosure so you can see what's involved in that process. And this was Stacy Wolbert, our Northwest Wildlife Diversity biologist, was wearing a GoPro cam while they were doing this. And we have Tim Hoppy carrying the mid-size exclosure, and also Patty Barber helping to put this up. So the mini exclude up over 1 egg. That one's really quick to put up. And then the second one just offers a bit more space from the egg. So if a little paw wanted to get in there and grab it or something, it just affords a bit more protection. But it's still very quick to put up. It only takes about 5 minutes, and really 2 people can do it. It was a good training opportunity, but you can see the 3 eggs there on the right. So here we're securing Patty's securing the eggs with the cable ties, and you'll see here at the end, watch for it, here comes the male. Comes right in, it's only 30 seconds later, and he's gonna settle in on the eggs. And that's the telltale sign when they do that little shimmy. So then we also have captive rearing, like we showed you, that's been helping. Now, you can see how it's filling out its range. It once was fairly, common but not abundant on all Great Lakes shorelines. So the map's starting to fill in, which is nice. And all of the recovery strategies were pulled into a federal recovery plan for the population, which is what I was helping to implement back in Michigan and now here in Pennsylvania. And we brought we stepped down all of those federal recovery plans into Pennsylvania's Wildlife Action Plan in 2005. So typically I'm working on the current Wildlife Action Plan, but we said we need to establish a recovery task force. We did that. okay? We needed to draft a recovery task plan. We did that. That was when I met Dan, and he hired me to do the recovery assessment. We evaluated the habitat condition out there, got that done. Implemented those activities, check that off. And then, protect the plovers when they nest here. We did that this season. So and we're working on developing more public education outreach with DCNR. So all of these things, that happened in sequence led us to this day. We had 3 territorial pairs in 2005. Dan said, whoa, this is exciting. I happened to move to the state. We met, we did a recovery assessment, worked with DCNR to recovery team. We've been coordinating all this time. All of these partners have been coordinating throughout. DCNR started a volunteer monitoring program. We acquired some funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for vegetation management, because that was a real problem out there. You can see in the slide and the picture so much of the woody vegetation that was out there. After that was initiated in 2011, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy went in and helped DCNR clear out the vegetation. We had common terns come back, which was also an extirpated species in the state. They started nesting there. We had shorebird use that tripled. This is an important migratory stopover site for many shorebirds. We had increasing migrant piping plovers stopping by, which were really exciting. And then here we are with our 2 successful pairs of piping plovers. It was really an amazing culmination of a lot of effort. And what's really exciting about it is it's not really just about piping plovers and common terns that we, obviously are really focused on bringing back, but it's an ecosystem restoration story. There are many, the Great Lakes Basin is a refuge for globally rare species and ecosystems. There are 6 community types just out on the Gull Point alone. So after treatment, after the vegetation was removed and treated, they're seeing these rare plants come back as well. So it's really an ecosystem restoration story. Piping plovers have unique requirements of a sand plain community, and so it really is an umbrella species for all of these others. So what do we do now? We have a new wildlife act. We're going to be continuing to implement that with our partners. We've got a nice end of the season meeting coming up in September to really regroup and think about what we need to do for next year. So if you're interested in learning more about piping plovers, or now that you see how cool they are, you need a plover fix this winter, there's some GreatLakesPipingPlover.org or their Facebook page, really great stories about the birds there. So I really think
Success story.
It is, and it's a special place, and plovers will only ever be at Presque Isle. So it's a unique part of Pennsylvania. It's a unique part of our history. There aren't many other birds or even mammals left, Matt could reference mammals, left to be recovered, from extirpated status. But this is one of our historic species of concern, and Kathy explained the value of this habitat as a whole. It took a lot of effort, and it will continue to take a fair amount of effort, but we'll work that in and be glad to have this part of Pennsylvania restored. So thanks again for your time. Any questions for Kathy?
Any questions?
Well, I have one. I wasn't here, so if it's dumb, that's okay.
no.
So, it is funny, you're talking about Presque Isle, and it is really unique, it's a spit. Spits move on their own. There's a lot of sand replenishment that the Corps has to do. You've been a lot of interaction, you talked about with DCNR. What interactions have been with the Corps of Engineers with their program for sand replenishment on the beaches and that kind of thing?
There's very high coordination between DCNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Army Corps of Engineers, and then we also help to inform that. So back when the agreement was written between the consultation agreement between the Corps and Fish and Wildlife.
Some of the monitoring, shorebird monitoring, initially funded through a Corps agreement.
Yes.
So there was an example.
Yeah.
Because of their actions and the historic plover presence, the Corps helped fund some of the monitoring efforts. That's a small amount of money, but a lot of coordination.
Thanks.
There are many players in an action like this, federal and state.
You don't see it, because all you see in the newspaper is there were a couple piping plovers show up on
I
Presque
know,
Isle. You
I
don't hear
know.
about all that.
Oh, yeah, huge
Kathy was
partnership.
insistent in really showing the bigger perspective, because you
Right.
don't do these things in isolation.
Right.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kathy, while you're there at the computer, would you mind hitting the Internet Explorer button to see if we have anything showing that might be related to a pheasant stocking? No, yep,
This is
oh,
what you wanted?
that's good, expand that, that's all. That's good, I just want to make sure it's still running.
All right.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
We'll move on to pheasant propagation update. Thank you, Dan and Kathy,
I
for
don't
that.
know.
Hand these around, please. Too many here. Yeah, we got plenty. Everybody get one? Just wanted to give a quick update on the pheasant propagation program. We went through our chick purchase this year, got 200,000 chicks. That went off amazingly well, without a hitch. Chicks showed up at our game farms as scheduled, in great condition. We're anticipating a fall release of around 170,000 birds. It's going to be a little bit lower than that, but close. And that's down about 15% from our normal recent year's goal of 200,000. Just want to emphasize one thing, and that's that our junior pheasant releases remain the same at about 15,000, in spite of the reduction. Back in 2005, when we reduced production from 200,000 to 100,000, we kept junior releases up at 15,000. We've always tried to maintain that level of release for our junior pheasant hunters. We're always working to improve our harvest rates. It's in our strategic plan to get to 60%, and our last study in 2015 measured us at 50%. We know that harvest rates are higher on our public lands, and one step that we've taken this year in our update of our pheasant stocking SOP is to eliminate stocking on private farms, essentially, in our hunter access program. We've been making a lot of progress in that over the years. In '98, when we did our last banding study, 49% of our birds were going to public, so 51 to private. As of 2015, we are at 87% public, only 13% on private farms. So we've been making progress. We're just going to kind of continue to seal the deal on that. One of the benefits of that, the side benefits, is that 13 or 14% of our birds that were going to private farms are now going back onto public lands, where most of our hunting occurs. Have been mining the data from our harvest rate study still. It's interesting that you look at the game lands that we stock, harvest rates go from 0% up to 60 or more percent. So why? And so we looked into that, and it turns out the areas that have the most pheasant hunting habitat get the most birds, get most regularly stocked, and particularly if we're stocking more in the interior of our game lands as opposed to right out on the edge where they might get out as readily accessible. All those things are related to the harvest rate. So in this SOP update that we did, we have basically made the turn. If a game lands isn't good enough to get stocked all the time, like in recent, we should stop stocking it. So we're focused. We are going to be reducing, taking about 12 game lands off our stocking list this year. And again, those birds that were going there will be going to areas that our birds are stocked every time, and would should help keep our harvest rates up, but also help reduce the sense or the feeling of reduced allocation that hunters are experiencing out there this fall. We have made progress, of course, in the cutting of the cost on the propagation program. Just recently, we've gotten some results from our previous fiscal year, ending June 30th. We're down about $1 million in expenditures from the year before, and those costs will continue to be going down as we benefit from the major part of that cost reduction was closing 2 farms. We did that right in the middle of last year, so we'll have a full year benefit this year. So we'll get down closer to $3 million. And what I wanted to focus on this last, real briefly, hopefully he'll cooperate, is this new stocking location app that we've developed. We're going to release it. We're getting comments from our regions right now on this, let's see, this is When you click on our link, we're gonna have a link on our website, it'll go to this screen where it talks about over 200 areas that we stock that are public land, and there's gonna be, let's see here. Yeah.
It's down below, right?
Oh,
Is it a login? James Bond, did you see it?
Well, maybe we're not gonna get a chance to see this unless somebody's smarter.
But it's really good.
Yeah. Anyway,
A nice gray screen.
well, it looked good a little bit of
Our system's so secure, we can't get into it.
well, never mind. Yeah, in the interest of time, but we're gonna have this map. You'll go to this map, it'll show these dots across the state, over 200 locations, game lands and other public properties. You click on that, and it'll tell you birds we put there last year, how many releases it got, so you can kind of get a sense. And if you can figure out where you live on this map, you can see where the locations are that are stocked closest to you. And then you can zoom in, and you can go right to the game lands and see that we have some game lands that are very big, 10,000 acres, but the stocking of pheasants goes on in about a 150-acre area, a little postage stamp in a sense. Well, if you don't see that on a map, it's kind of hard to figure that out as a first timer looking for places to hunt. And we're trying to focus on and making it easier for hunters to find these birds. So we have some game lands that are 3 different parcels, and we only stock one of them. So that's, when we say game lands 230 or whatever, this map, you zoom in, it'll take you right to where we're stocking them essentially. So we're hoping that hunters will find benefit in that map. Any questions on pheasant propagation?
Well, I think you should be commended on that $1 million savings. That's a major change, and it took some outside the box thinking to
Yes, it
to
did.
get to that.
Well, I congratulate Brian for bringing that to the table. But yeah, we've made a lot of changes, and it, you know, it's good. It's a good thing to do.
There's been a lot of questions, and up at, again, the Elk Range, I got to talk to a lot of the guys from Pheasants Forever and Bodenhorn up there. And he brought up a question about the value that Pheasants Forever brings to the table, and what kind of PR money comes from their involvement in the program. I know we have the pheasant stamp, and it's bringing in a few dollars. And so that's not the whole value of the program. He's trying to point out, I guess, that, you know, other organizations are involved in the pheasant program that bring funds into the pheasant program that we're not calculating. Is there a way to calculate that, or is there a way to figure out exactly what the value of that is?
Certified.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking more than the pheasant propagation program here
Correct.
now. We're talking about the wild pheasant population and restoration attempts.
And
Habitat work that they're
Talking about
doing.
habitat work, the value of the habitat work. I mean, how much are they bringing into the commission? What's that value in PR money?
What's interesting is how many are hunting just pheasants, that you're capturing that PR dollar in
Correct.
addition to all the other costs.
Right. So when we look at the whole program, we look at the cost of the program, and we instituted a pheasant stamp, but we didn't count the rest of the money. Where's the rest of the money at? And is it being applied to the program, to the cost of the program? So we get a program that's $100 per participant, and say, well, it's not worth doing it. Let's look at the whole program. Let's find out what other things are being brought in because of the program. That's all I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I don't know quite how to answer that at this time, but it's something worth thinking about.
Right.
Certainly, it's great to have partnerships. I mean, we saw the partnership benefits of the Plover project, but we have some great partners in all the things we do.
And if we're looking at a specific program as an expensive cost, you want to include all the aspects of that program. You know, not only the cash portion of it, but what does the rest bring in? And if we were to curtail the program, what would that do? What would we lose on the other other side of it. If Pheasants Forever suddenly stopped doing work, what are we losing in PR money? What are we losing in habitat work that benefits other species? Just to make an informed decision on going forward.
Well, and all the youth events that they're running,
Right.
fairly soon, those are very important, and the youth hunters.
Yeah.
We're only counting the permits we sell, but every youth hunter's got a permit included with their license.
Yeah, that's true. There's habitat work and they're spending money and we should be counting that. But there's just the recruitment of hunters, the license sales that occur.
Right.
And this indirect cost, the benefits of
Do
that.
we get youth hunter events, do we get a participation number from them that we can put out there?
You know, we provide pheasants for hosted hunt birds, and that can be Pheasants Forever, it can be a wide variety of people.
Right.
We know how many birds we put out, we know how many hunters are involved, how many different clubs. We track that stuff, but outside of that even, there are different chapters, I'm sure, of Pheasants Forever that hunt. They don't get birds from us. They're not necessarily in our system unless we help with enrollment.
Right.
We do have a system for enrolling hunters into these things, event manager, I think it's called. So we do keep track of some of that, but there's outside hunts that are going on that we don't even
I'd just
track.
like to get a whole picture, not just the small version that we've seen so far. Because it's going forward, there's going to be a discussion about that. The value of the program and where it affects youth and where it affects our hunters and what's the cost per hunter and that sort of.
We'll continue to work on that.
Thank you.
Get back to you. Next, why don't we have Dr. Brown mention the EHD outbreak in deer that's going on, you may have heard about?
One of the
Thanks
busiest
for
guys
letting
in
me
PGC.
come and speak
One of the
to you
busiest
today.
guys.
Usually when you know and I'm on the agenda, it isn't as cheery as plovers or anything else we've heard about so far.
As usual. Thank you, Dr.
We'll
Brown.
try and get through this with no tears. Close the whole thing.
Nice get up.
Just escape.
Call up to your desk.
Is there a computer person in the house?
Call Deanna.
You want to do that for all the leaves?
Randy's going to get his gun. Randy will fix it. Stand back.
We're getting Deanna.
Let's see if we can just go override it with.
There we go, you got it fixed.
Boy, he's gonna run.
You also have to have a PhD to get into our system.
Let's go over top of it. Paper over it.
Maybe.
Not only couldn't I get mine running, but I screwed everybody else's up.
Hey, if you're gonna do it right.
There we go. PhD.
So, what we're going to talk about today is EHD, or hemorrhagic disease of deer. What I wanted to cover is just sort of what happens with the disease, a little bit about what we know about the disease, which we actually do know a lot about, and then briefly go into where we're at with the ongoing outbreak. And I wanted to acknowledge two of our collaborators down at SCWDS, which is down at the University of Georgia in Pennsylvania. We're a member of SCWDS and very fortunate, particularly with HD, because they are the global authorities on this virus in deer and have been studying it for 70 years. And it's actually where SCWDS got its start, working on a disease that was killing deer in the southeast called Disease X. So what hemorrhagic disease, there's a bunch of different names we use with it and that you might hear. Collectively, hemorrhagic disease is composed of two different clinically indistinguishable diseases. There's epizootic hemorrhagic disease, or EHD, which we frequently hear, which is caused by the virus epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus, or EHDV. And then there's blue tongue, which is caused by blue tongue virus, or BTV. Now, since at least in deer, we can't tell the difference between them if you just look at an animal or do a necropsy on them. We sort of group those together to call it hemorrhagic disease. We can tell the difference between those two as far as the virus that's causing it, but it takes laboratory tests once we get those. You can further break those viruses, EHDV or blue tongue, into a variety of different serotypes listed here, and they're all characterized by these little protein spikes that come off the virus. Really, the importance there is once you're infected with one serotype, the animal has immunity to that specifically. In North America, we have 3 serotypes of EHDV and historically 5 blue tongue viruses, but each year we get more and more blue tongue viruses that show up, particularly down in Florida as they blow up from South America and the Caribbean. So as far as host range, this is one of those viruses that can, or these groups of viruses that can infect a lot of different species of animals, a lot of different ruminants, both domestic and wild. Oftentimes those infections are going to be without clinical signs of disease, and so we only know they're infected if we go and look for antibodies or something like that. As far as clinical disease in the east, the primary disease we see this in is going to be white-tailed deer. You go out west, you can see disease in muleys, as well as pronghorn and bighorn sheep, at least with blue tongue. But here in the east, the major player in these HD outbreaks is white-tailed deer. And really, EHD tongue virus is probably the most important viral disease that we deal with in white-tailed deer. We can get infection in ruminants. It really depends on whether it's blue tongue virus or EHDV. In blue tongue, it's a well-known disease of sheep. That is a really important disease in the agricultural sector. Epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus, or EHDV, which is probably the one we see most common in deer. It can disease an infection in cattle. Usually when cattle are infected, it's subclinical, so we don't see signs of disease. But what they've started to see in the last few years is that during these large outbreaks in deer, you will get these sort of ulcers and muzzle lesions on these cattle. And it has been something we've been seeing more and more of in the last few outbreaks. And actually, during this current outbreak, they've had a report of disease in cattle just over the border in Ohio. So how is it transmitted? This is an insect-transmitted disease. It's transmitted by very small flying insects called helicoides or biting midges. These are no-see-ums if you are ever on the coast and running through the dunes and your legs start burning. This is usually the culprit here. There are a variety of different species globally. There's about 1,200 different species of helicoides in the world. However, we only know of a few that are known to transmit these viruses. That being said, I think everyone really is on the same page that we really don't know all the different species of midges that can transmit these viruses. But during the outbreak, the important thing is that in order to transmit this, you really need the midge. So can't transmit deer to deer. The midge is crucially important in transmitting this. The way the virus works, it infects the cells that line the blood vessels. It destroys those cells lining the blood vessels. So it gets you in, not only helps with creating the name of the disease, but it sort of helps you understand what you're seeing when you see the lesions grossly. You get destruction of those cells lining the blood vessels, so the blood vessels are leaky. You get a lot of blood in different body cavities. You can get bleeding organs, and that's what leads to the death of the animal. As far as what it looks like on the animal level, we see 3 different types of disease. You have peracute and acute, which we'll sort of lump together. Those are diseases that you see when the virus is actively infecting the animal in the summer months. So those are the diseases we'll see that relate to bleeding, to leaky vessels. We see these in the surviving animals in the winter. As far as clinical signs, the things we see most often on the landscape is just going to be a dead deer. Often they are near water. We don't exactly know the reason for that, but we think that when these animals become very high fever and very febrile, they go to water to cool down, and then they succumb to the infection. The other theory out there is that as they start to lose all this fluid from their vessels, they become dehydrated, go to drink the water. But one of the common things you will hear is you find dead deer near bodies of water. These are the clinical signs you can see. Oftentimes, it's just an animal sort of stumbling, lethargic. It's got reddened areas around the thinly haired areas of the eyes. But again, these clinical signs are short-lived, and the animal quickly dies after that. So here are some images you can see here, sort of reddening around those eyes and in the ear pinna where there's not hair, sort of unaware of its surroundings. This is a big buck from Kansas, drooling with reddened areas around the eyes. And this is another buck from Kansas where it's got actually blood dripping from its nose and just sitting in the water. What are the lesions we see? So again, these are going to be the ones you see in the summer months. These are acute HD associated with active viral replication. You can see these ulcers in the body. This is going to be like a vesicle or a little bubble there. Once it ruptures, it creates these ulcers. It can be anywhere in the oral cavity. You can see sort of bleeding along those papilla or those sort of projections in the oral cavity. You can see a lot of leaking in the lungs. Basically, you can see all that fluid there. That's just red tinged fluid that's leaked out of the lungs. Or you can look and see bleeding. Just basically, that's all hemorrhage into the lungs. It's heavy and hard to lift. A few more lesions. Inside of the rumen, you can just see hemorrhage all throughout the rumen. Hemorrhage on the outside, and hemorrhage on one of the larger vessels in the heart. So again, those are what we'll see in the summer months: bleeding, leaky vessels, and hemorrhage. What we see in the winter months are chronic HD, and these again are animals that have survived viral insult in the summer months. They survived that, they cleared the viral infection, but the virus did enough damage that you see some of these in the winter months. We see emaciated, skinny deer. We see cracks in the hooves. We can even see some antler malformations in the winter months. So again, with this, part of the problem is that the virus has already been cleared, so we can't necessarily identify the virus in these cases. And it's certainly a variety of other diseases that we're going to be dealing with. One we'll hear about at 11, but certainly TB, CWD, some of these other things. So for after these hard HD years, it's important to keep in mind that we will see increased number of skinny, starving deer on the landscape in those winter months. It is a seasonal disease. Again, we need that midge to get transmission, so we typically start to see cases in Pennsylvania with outbreaks in August, and they go right up until we get our hard frost, which kills the midge and stops transmission pretty fast. What we've seen over the years is that we start to get a few cases in August, but really the bulk of our cases during an outbreak year are going to be in the month of September. And it tends to happen like that, like clockwork every year. Again, you get with your frost a hard stop with the mortality, and then you see these chronic cases trickle in over the late fall, winter months. For diagnostics, we have a good setup here. We've been working with SCWITUS for years. Basically what we need, and we've talked to all the regions about this, and all the field staff have received training, is to get lung and spleen. We need to get them quite early because the things that can limit our diagnostics are if the animal really rots on the landscape, so if it's in a creek and it's really hot out, it becomes non-diagnostic pretty quick, or freezing the sample. So we have to get the sample quickly, put it in a fridge or on ice packs, and then the rest is pretty easy. Again, it's just a reminder that those skinny deer that we see in the winter months, there is no test to say that's chronic HD. Basically what we have to do in those cases is just rule out all the other things it could be, like CWD, like TB, pneumonia, things like that. And if we rule those out, and we had a HD year the summer before, that's sort of how we back our way into that diagnosis. As far as population impacts, this is in some ways very different than CWD. With CWD, what's the main thing we hear? That we don't see dead deer on the landscape. We don't see a lot of them. How can it be that big of a deal? But they've shown in a lot of the studies out west that it can still have population impacts because it's a slow, smoldering disease that never really. With HD, what we see is this explosive mortality. People can't help but see dead deer. But what we've never been able to find is long-term population impacts. So even in 2007 and 2012, when we had some of the largest known HD outbreaks in North American history over the last 100 years, We have seen local pretty heavy mortality, even reports of, hunter reports of seeing less deer in that followed, but in subsequent years, the population tends to bounce back pretty good. As far as public health impacts, these are not zoonotic diseases. They cannot infect humans, so there are no public health implications there. And then for agricultural implications, we already talked about. Blue tongue is a disease of sheep, and we can have mortality in cattle, both with EHDV or blue tongue. Certainly, we've notified ag of our situation here, and we work closely with them. So as far as what we see with patterns of disease, this is sort of reports of disease over the last 75 years in North America. And what we tend to see is a pattern where the more north, at least in the eastern U.S. here, the more north you go, outbreaks become more sporadic, but when they occur, they're more severe. So down south, we get HDV or blue tongue activity every single year, but you may get 1 or 2 dead deer a year. As you start to move further north, outbreaks occur less frequently, but when they do, they're very dramatic. And so here in Pennsylvania, what we tend to see is an outbreak every 5 or so years. And this is since 2000, the data. And in 2011, we only had outbreaks in our captive deer in the state. But if we take that one out, we're outbreaks in 96, 2002, 2007, 2012. These were large outbreaks, a lot of mortality, and it again tends to follow that 5-year pattern that we frequently see. With each of these years, we almost always tend to see our worst mortality down in that far southwest part of the state. And in each of the years in Pennsylvania, we've only had EHDV2, so that's been the only reported virus that we've got. So it takes us to where we are in 2017. We have had reports of increasing mortality again in the southwest part of the state. Reports of 150 to 200 deer in these 3-county area down here. We have isolated EHDV2 from Beaver and Washington County, and we have a few more samples pending for Allegheny and a few surrounding counties. I just got back from a meeting in Georgia where we were talking, a tech meeting on wildlife disease, and they've been having similar reports of mortality and confirmed EHDV2 outbreaks in West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and a few other states. So it really seems like this year we're seeing an outbreak involving this area here. Again, it doesn't seem to be as big as previous years. No one really knows why. One of the theories out there is that since it isn't a bad drought year, that perhaps we're not getting the congregation of deer around those waterways where the midges are and getting increased transmission. But that being said, we're still not in the heart of when we see most of our cases, which is September. So we're monitoring it. All of the field staff have been aware, and we've conversed on how to submit samples. And at this point, we're just monitoring. So at that point, I'll take any questions you have.
Great news.
Sorry.
Thank you. And finally, Matt.
Okay. I do have a handout that kind of parallels the presentation today. Okay, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide some input on what I think is an important and emerging issue within our fur-taking community. I think I can safely say that the Pennsylvania Game Commission has done more to provide new opportunities to its fur takers even comes into play. And so I'll provide some kind of unbiased information today surrounding that issue, but my hope is it will stimulate some discussion on what other opportunities we might be able to provide our young fur takers. So in Pennsylvania, a junior aged 12 to 16 can participate in fur taking through several different license types. They can purchase a junior fur taker's license, and relatively few of those are sold in a given year. or purchase a junior combination license, which allows for fur-taking privileges as long as other outdoor activities, hunting and fur-taking type possibilities. And so the majority of our young people out there, our juniors, are purchasing that combination license. And if we look at the totals over the years, these are total combination and junior fur taker licensing. We've seen a fair amount of fluctuation ranging from a little over 50,000 to about 56,000 in recent, and they have been declining slightly in the past several seasons. But what's more important is if we actually drill down and look at our game take and fur take survey data, we can actually estimate the participation rate, or the number of juniors that are actually participating in fur taking if they have this broader combination license. And as we look at that trend, we see that during the past 4 or 5 years, in fact, there has been a decline in junior fur taker participation. Steady decline. I think we can all agree that's not a trend we want to see continue. We recognize the value of young fur takers as they transition into our fur taking community. And so it certainly warrants the discussion today and supports the notion that there is something going on, and we might be able to change that trend if we provide additional opportunity or additional programs that are focused on young trappers. We thought a good approach might be to first look at what ones that are participating, nearly 5,500 junior fur takers out there. What species are they focusing their fur-taking activity, and particularly their trapping activity, on? And it's pretty apparent here. The red bars indicate the actual estimated harvest taken by junior fur takers, and the yellow bars are the harvest from all other fur takers out there. And we can see that muskrats and raccoons are the most commonly targeted or harvested species by junior fur takers, and on average about 12,000 beaver annually. The price of beaver pelts has been fluctuating dramatically and is very low right now, and yet our harvests are fairly stable during most years. In fact, weather conditions in the spring affect our beaver harvest statewide more than the pelt price or market demand. Pennsylvania trappers consistently trap beaver regardless of what those pelts are worth. But I think it's safe to say that if we did provide any additional opportunity for junior fur takers to beaver, it would have little or no impact on our overall statewide harvest, and we certainly have no biological concerns or issues with that type of proposal. I think it is important to note that nearly in most years, over 60%, some years nearly 70% of our beaver harvest really occurs within 5 wildlife management units, units 1A, 1B, 2F, 3C, and 3D. And so, you know, a unique opportunity specific to beaver would provide opportunities for some junior fur takers, but not all equally across the Commonwealth, just because of the distribution of wetland habitats in our beaver populations in the state. Primeness is certainly an issue that we try and consider whenever setting any season dates, and probably should play a role in considering additional or early season for any given species. And beaver are somewhat unique among our fur bearers in that they prime very late in the year. Pennsylvania beaver peak primeness until March. And what we call peak primeness is a period of time where the guard hairs, the longer, thicker, heavier guard hairs on the pelt, actually reach their terminal length or maximum length. And at that time, blood flow ceases actually to the follicles of those hairs, which is why we have a very white or creamy pale leather on a truly primed pelt. That's part of the priming process. A pelt that is post-prime will be reddish or gray or even bluish once it's dried, whereas a fully primed pelt will stay this light creamy color, and that's where it has maximum value in the fur trade. Now it's important, I think, to realize that although we have periods of peak primeness, we don't limit fur taking just to those periods of the calendar year. Pelts do have some value as they approach prime periods and even subsequently after peak primeness is achieved, and where we allow either trapping or hunting of those fur bearers to occur. And you can see for most species we capture windows of peak primeness. There's a few exceptions to that. And in some cases, with raccoons and foxes, we actually allow the harvest of those animals prior to even moderate primeness periods. And so while primeness is a guide for us, it's not the only guide. In many cases, we want to maximize harvest. I think that's true for raccoons right now in many areas of the state. Provide opportunities outside of those windows, but that can provide a guide for us, I think, in terms of looking for times of the year we can provide perhaps a youth opportunity for any given species. And as we look at this chart, you know, there are some areas there that might lend themselves to a youth opportunity. For example, many jurisdictions harvest muskrats in the spring when they're reaching peak prideness. We currently do not in Pennsylvania for a variety of reasons, but that could be a ability for a youth opportunity, just kind of something to think about. And as we look at beaver, you know, this could give us some guidance as to how late in the fall or early in the fall we want to stray from those prideness periods to provide any type of opportunity there. One other issue I think we should have some dialogue about is just safety concerns. You know, the most efficient and humane traps that are being used for beaver are the larger and many Kingdom style 330 body gripping conibear traps. And you know, those aren't the traps that young trappers should learn to trap with. Typically they learn with smaller traps when they're targeting muskrats and raccoons. And that's not to say that they couldn't use those devices safely, certainly with some guidance and supervision. But we wouldn't want first-time trappers to be going out with large body gripping traps initially. I think we want other types of opportunities out there as well. And so those are some issues.
What's interesting, you know, this actually came out of the Northwest. You said 3 of the 5 management units are really in the Northwest.
Sure, yeah.
And I think, you know, if you look at some of the bars that you've shown here for like coyote, gray fox, red fox, we actually do a lot of trapping prior to prideness. And really, some of the reasons that you try to trap beaver may be for the fur, would be to control flooding and other issues.
That's right, yeah, nuisance control. And the castor still has value into those other months as well, and castor markets are pretty strong.
But I guess I agree that, you know, whether we do this with beaver, and you're right, you know, you do need to watch with the conibears, or if we do some spring trapping, although muskrats seem to be in some troubles. I'm not sure if you want to do spring muskrat.
Well, and the question would be, would a spring muskrat season recruit additional trappers, or would it just increase the harvest from the same young trappers that are trapping muskrats in the fall? I suspect the latter.
I guess what I'm encouraged by, though, is that, you know, it may actually provide some opportunity. The suggestion here was to try to overlap with Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're not trying to move it way back up into October. We're talking about moving it up a month or whatever. I don't see it. I mean, I don't see a real reason not to. I guess the other question, so, you know, when you're out hunting as a junior, you have to be accompanied. Does the junior trapper need to be accompanied?
No, my understanding is no, they do not.
See, if you required accompaniment, you would deal with your conibear issue. You know what I mean?
But they need to carry a firearm, if you utilize a firearm.
For dispatch, yeah, I'd defer protection. I think the answer is yes, but not a handgun, is that correct?
No, they couldn't.
Not a gun.
Couldn't take a
Club.
handgun. But I guess that's one way we could deal with the conibear issue, right? Is to have them accompanied.
Yeah, or some other type of mentor system, which is what you're suggesting. You know, you point out the season start dates for raccoon and foxes being earlier than prideness, and you know, that was a issue of contention for many years, and that the trappers would come before us, and so I'm not sure how, you know, how we should move forward on this issue. You know, one suggestion I would have would be to convene a meeting with the Trappers Association and our I&E staff that have some expertise in recruitment and retention, and maybe talk about some survey work with junior trappers to look for opportunities there, to understand the restrictions, and to try and move forward from that.
I think that's a good way to get started anyway. I wouldn't want to see us impact the resource. I know we're talking about muskrats and the downturn in the population there, so, you know, if you're going to proceed carefully with it. Any other comments or questions? Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Very good, that's all we have.
Very good. Well,
The next 2 hours. Yeah, we can bring up the Northwest.
finish with Wayne? Just say it briefly, so.
I'm gonna try to do this without a PowerPoint show today. Not that I don't have one.
Okay.
Make it quick.
Well, of course, there's a lot going on. We've got a lot of moving parts. The regions are working on everything from dumpsters to, we've got purchase orders out to buy drops.
Speak louder.
Drop boxes. We need some more.
Speak louder.
We need an amplifier.
Everybody else did, okay?
Wayne, before we get into it,
Yeah, I'll lean forward like this. How's it?
okay, before we get into it, if you would also address today, we sort of dropped the subject of urine-based lures. I'd like to take a look at that. And the other thing is neighborhood feeding.
Okay.
Okay? All right, appreciate it.
Well, we got a lot of problems to deal with. So anyhow, you know, the efforts to gear up for this fall are all ongoing with the region as well as Bureau of Wildlife staff and myself. You know, I've been up to DMA 3 with Dave Mitchell, looking at that site as well as with Chris, and talked to 10 landowners, all adjacent and in holders there, and they were all, well, 9 out of 10 was, and the other 9 were telling the other guy to be quiet. So they're supportive of us shooting deer there this fall, so that's good. But we first are going to try to, of course, we've put those DMAP units in place up there as well as down in DMA 2, and that's really as we move from surveillance to monitoring. We need to have a higher sample size, a greater sample size in order to be able to do that. And then as we move forward, you know, to actual control, we'll probably have to go to targeting. You essentially get monitoring, surveillance, originally surveillance, then monitoring, and then targeting in order to find out really where do we want to take actions on a very big landscape out there. So those things are all ongoing. You know, we're getting everything from the regions trying to, we've difficulties getting landfills. We're going to have to talk to PDA. PDA was here with us this past week. We had 16 sports writers come in, and we met for 3 hours here, talking about anything they wanted to and showing them slides. And then we went over to PDA afterwards, and we did the same thing over there. And so we're having, even today, we're having trouble getting some landfills to take our deer. And Dr. Wolfgang has talked about the possibility of using composting to dehydrate them and then burning in order to do them. So we're going to have to be revisiting that as we revisit that statewide plan. So just one more, you know, moving part, to make sure I don't forget anything. And then, of course, we're chasing, you know, we've had, you know, about the ear tag deer up in the elk range, but we're also chasing other emaciated deer around. And as Dr. Brown just talked to you about, it's not always CWD, it could be something else. But then with the deer farms involved, we know we have a problem. That farm down in Bedford County that was depopulated, of course, had 27 positives out of 155, but they're working on 1,000 traces on that. Of potential.
What is that many, that means that's how many deer would be in the total number of farms that received deer from the farm that was quarantined, or?
1,000 deer potentially infected or exposed, potentially exposed,
That were moved from that farm?
or from a traceback farm. So, you know, we don't know
And
what's
this problem isn't a pen farm problem. Is that what we continue?
So all I'm saying is there's more than likely coming down the road, there's going to be a lot of shaking going on. And of course, that plays back into the question that Commissioner Schlemmer suggested. We also have things that we need to do. I mean, right now, talking with Brian, in Maryland, with those partial bans in Maryland and Ohio, we should be closing those. You know, I've talked before about doing an all-state, you know, all-province, but at least right now, we should probably be taking care of that. And of course,
I thought we already did, though. I thought
No.
we talked about that a while ago, and we discussed it and said, yeah, let's move forward with it.
Yeah, and actually, there's some debate with Chris about whether or not the reg you just changed actually says that, but then it seems there's some conflicts here, so. But if, regardless, I think what we have in place for right now could already cover it, but we have to talk back to Jason about that. But if that is the case and we decide we want to go forward, we need to make sure it's broadcast to the public, very, very soon, because the season down there in Maryland will be starting up quite soon.
Michigan just did that way. They
I know.
limited importation from anywhere.
Yeah, and New York has really done pretty much the same, I think. Louisiana, there's quite a number now that they're all heading that way. And of course, then I went to DC a week or so, a little over a week ago, talking about funding with a large group at American Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And of course, one of the policy things top on their table is movement of live cervids as being a huge risk factor.
Are we involved with the Department of Ag, gone to the legislature to get a ban on movement of live cervids?
We have not.
Well, I mean, we can point to the fact that this, I mean, I get it, they don't want us to point to it, and they're saying straight out that it's not them. But the truth is, a majority of what we're seeing has been trucked into this state.
Well, it's always hard to, and again, since nobody's ever there to actually see the disease transfer, it's essentially impossible to say, Joe did this,
Well, the problem there is that if you've got a penned area that's got 27 positives, and we're not seeing it in the wild herd in that number, could it come up from Maryland? Could it come down from New York? Could we get it elsewhere? Absolutely, that's a possibility, but not in the numbers that we're seeing.
in our problem, of course, we have to, every time we get a new infection in the state, DMA3, with that positive up there, now all of a sudden we have a whole new place where we have to go and put action on the ground. Each time that happens, the amount of resources that we have to put in place in order to deal with a single new infection will cause our costs and our efforts to go exponentially up, just like the disease increases exponentially. I still feel, looking at the distribution in the state, that we have a chance of doing something about this. If it was everywhere, and if it was the kind of disease that was evenly distributed across the landscape, I'd say we didn't.
So let's discuss that for a second. We say that we have the opportunity to do something about it. What have we done?
Right now, we've monitored and we've surveilled.
But what have we done?
We haven't taken action yet, and that's what we're gearing up for right now, right? But then, understand, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to the agency. It's everything from getting, the capacity in the regions to deal with things, dealing with aphids, the people that shoot, the landowners being able to have permission. We have to have permission in those lands. And then the time of year, I'm arguing against just a knee-jerk reaction where we just go out and kill deer. I mean, I think we really need to make sure that we learn something from each event, because this will be the baby steps that lead to what needs to be a long-term systematic control program for the state. And we have to build that.
And I don't argue that, but what I do argue is that for the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, we've discussed about a rapid response team to go out and take out family units. If we sit and wait until the winter when the deer are all grouped up, you've got that one buck that could be, one young buck that could be infected that straggles out 25 miles and starts off a population. So if we don't attack it when we get it, then we give the opportunity for those bucks during the mating season to make contact with hundreds of other deer, and then we spread the CWD by our inaction. So I'm afraid that that's what we're seeing, and I don't want to see inaction anymore. And I don't think any of the other commissioners
I
want to see it.
want to say something.
And I
'cause
agree.
I want to add some things, because I think there's some things we cannot overlook, and these are lessons we've learned from other states. You look at Wisconsin, what happened in the way of the agency. Now, they responded in a very, just as you're saying, aggressive, we're going to get this done. The political pushback, because the agency didn't take the time to work the public, shut the program down. Now Wisconsin's stuck with an irreversible trend of CWD that's compromised the environment and never come out. So I think one of the actions the agency has taken in response to Wisconsin, because the reaction is we want to do in there and kill it fast, and what happened in Wisconsin is they're dead in the water as they sit now. I think one of the things that this agency we have done, and we've been working with this for 2 years now, is getting out in the public. We've spent a lot of time downtown getting the support of our legislature, out in the communities, getting staff on board, getting information on board, all the information we've got out to the outdoor writers. These are very critical steps in order for us to have long-term effect on dealing with CWD. Talked to an individual who's won the CWD response in Wisconsin. I talked to him and I said, what's your analysis of what went wrong? He says, you know, we had it right. We were doing the right thing, but we went in there hard and we told everybody, we don't care what you say. This is what we're doing. And then the governor, who obviously was worried about re-election, decided to bring in an outside consultant, Dr. James Kroll, who basically told the hunters what they wanted was, you don't have to kill all these deer. No, you don't have to do away with feeding. You can go back to feeding. Now Wisconsin's that over. So I think it's really important for us to note there's a lot of behind-the-scene things that don't seem like action, but if we didn't take those actions, we would probably fail as an agency. So I just wanted to make sure we understood what was going on there. We also did a shoot in February down, which gave us a chance to test the system and gave us the opportunity working with USDA Wildlife Services to make sure how we could get this process done. So you're right, though. It doesn't seem very visible, but I think for the public to understand is there has been a ton of work by the agency to grease the skids to get us to where we're at today.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're not doing anything. What I'm saying is I think visibly, and I don't know what Wisconsin did. My understanding was they did the nuclear thing and they went in and they took out everything and they lowered the population, they lowered the herd.
Actually, the population went up during their eradication.
So-
The population
Yeah.
increased because they did not have the cooperation of the hunters.
Right. So but that's what we were talking about, in that we want to buy-in from the public. I mean, we need the buy-in. We need to get them to go out there and use the DMAP tags or the.
Exactly. That's why that was set up, to use hunters first. Exactly.
In those township areas.
Exactly. Yep.
Not the whole DM, but in the
Correct.
township
And that's
area
why
where
that
we
was
have
done.
figured, that we've got positive CWD in there.
But we don't want anybody to ever think that those DMAP permits are gonna make a difference to CWD. They enhance our ability
Surveillance,
to
which is
surveil.
important.
Oh, I understand
Right.
that, I understand that.
I think the other important step that we've taken down there is we've tried to work very hard with the members of the legislature that are directly impacted where we're going to be having to do these shooting operations. We've gotten great support from the legislative members as we've briefed them and brought them up to speed.
So what's the possibility of our creating our own rapid response team?
Well, it's good in the future. I mean, we're gonna, as we build forward, there's gonna be all kinds of things. So right now, we need a refrigerated trailer. And, I got a line up.
That's the issue, and we need to get on those antlerless deer before these bucks disperse. And of course, the Bureau can respond or answer questions on peak dispersal, but keying in on those antlerless deer is the key to having us any chance of getting those, because they're antlerless deer when they're the most dangerous, prior to when they're ready to disperse.
And there are a lot of nuances, as we get into this, like I said, we need to use adaptive management and learn as we go. We
It
have,
does appear slow. I think the other thing we have to come to a realization, this is something we're going to be dealing with the rest of our careers and
Sure.
the next people up beyond us.
We're
So,
gonna get rid of it.
yeah, so this is going to be an ongoing activity that is just never going to go away.
So how do we get the legislature to buy in to fund this? We're talking about spending a tremendous amount of money, and as we go forward, it's gonna take more and more and more of our budget
Yep.
to deal with this. So I think the legislature needs to.
and shooting for us. Their concern right now is that, they've got a limited sized crew, and when you have to haul out 100 deer in a couple of nights with only 2 or 3 or 4 guys, then that's a lot of strain on those guys. So we need to be able to logistically either pay them so that they can get temporary staff in order to do that, or have federal funding come to assist them.
And Wayne, in his new role, has been directly working with surveillance is every bit as important as shooting. Because if we don't better understand where the disease is on the landscape and give us the information we need to prioritize where these shoots are going to happen, we're kind of still shooting in the dark. In addition, the research that'll be hitting the ground is going to be critical in us identifying and finding the chinks in the armor in this disease to hopefully we get lucky and we find something that helps us be more effective.
And you should, on terminology, surveillance. You know, if we don't have it, some, even a higher density where potentially you could actually hone in on those high prevalence areas and take actions, because of the distribution of this disease being patchy, hitting those hot spots can go a long ways towards decreasing the overall prevalence level, I think. But again, it's theoretical until we actually get it done and prove it.
The biggest challenge is we're trying to solve a problem that nobody's got a solution to. We're trying to help the solution.
Well, tell us about Illinois, where are they at? Because they are the closest to,
Yep, Illinois, of course, they use targeted removal, and they've kept their prevalence level low.
It's still spreading.
But it has still spread, and so there's, questions about whether or not targeted removal could enhance the spread. And of course, the research that we're planning with Penn State, we'll look at that with GPS collar deer. We'll GPS collar them 1 year, shoot them, and see whether or not there's any, if we exasperate the spreading of the disease. If it is, then can we modify how we do our shoots, or in a way that would mitigate against that, so we don't cause that kind of problem. So that's
So you're saying that by shooting, we're forcing the deer to spread?
well, perhaps if you shoot the adult does, then perhaps the fawns disperse farther, is the thought.
they lose protection of the mother, and everybody's picking on them, so they take off.
So it's a concept of taking out that family group.
So the question then is, are there any ways that we could design our shooting operations that would mitigate against that? Or some other way that we take the animals out. So there's a lot of moving parts. We don't know everything. We do have, I've got 5 speaking engagements in the next 6 weeks. I think the region has other ones, so we're continuing. We're talking with some of our legislative breakfast kinds of deals, so we're talking with legislators about this.
Yeah, regions are actively involved,
Yep.
so there's a lot of outreach
And we're
that's
training
ongoing right
up,
now.
Rob Miller has people from his council coming in on Friday, and we're gonna develop a little PowerPoint amongst us for them, so that they can, help.
I think that's the answer. I think most hunters are very apathetic. If it doesn't affect them personally, they don't get involved in it. But I think this affects everybody, and in the end, will affect everybody. If some of the information that's coming out of CDC and stuff is true, then we could have some serious issues across the landscape. And if our population of hunters doesn't get involved and doesn't start to push the legislature along, see an end to this stuff, and it will impact Pennsylvania hunting. So.
And really, the problem is, like Dr. Brown mentioned a little while ago, EHDs, boom, all kinds of dead deer. This is like the slow walk, the creeping crud that
People
creeps
don't
up
see
on you.
Yep,
You
truly
don't see it.
insidious.
And then all of a sudden, gets to a certain point, perhaps, where the environment's contaminated and you can't do anything. It's like, you're dead. That's the danger.
Well, I believe you got the full support of the commissioners to take an aggressive attack on this disease. And I think we run it from Wisconsin. That's my gut reaction is let's go just blast them out of the water. But that did not work for Wisconsin. And they tried a lot of things. You had to shoot so many does before you could shoot a buck, and they tried quite a few things initially, and they were all rejected by the hunters. The hunters just did not participate, and their population actually increased during the eradication.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do a number of things now, down at that Franklin farm, the Franklin County farm. We were putting a DMAP unit around that, right around a mile radius. Not one that's gonna be online or anything. I think there are 15 individual landowners. They will be contacted by the deer team, to try to get permits to them and make sure that we get the heads. And then perhaps on how many heads we get, perhaps do a shooting operation there. DCNR owns a large portion of the land right there, as well as another large landowner, so there's a possibility there. The objective being to determine for sure, or with some halfway confidence, that there's nothing on the outside there.
Right, and I think that's good. I think that, keeping it to the township level, and I don't know what Wisconsin did, whether they went, DMA-wide, attempted to lower the entire DMA. I think if we look at the township level data, and if that doesn't work, then we go further. But we really do have to start somewhere.
They weren't targeted, they were nuclear.
Yeah, they took it all. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's about it. Well, let me think.
Hey, Wayne, will you come back when you get some good news?
That's why we saved the Northwest till last.
Yeah, yeah.
You'll have to get somebody that gives you good
It's
news.
the land of rainbows and unicorns.
All right, Rich, you're up. Let's go.
Got it
Lunch
right.
is waiting.
Double team too.
It's easy to follow Dr. Doom. All right. Good morning, Commissioners, Director Burhans, esteemed guests and colleagues. Rich Kramer from the Northwest Region. I have with me today Regis Senko, our I&E Supervisor, and we are going to give you a short program about the Northwest Region. Every region has a reason to feel proud, every bureau, every program area in the Game Commission. The Game Commission is filled with outstanding employees, and the Northwest Region is no different. You heard a little bit about some of the things that make us special earlier with the piping plovers, and Reg will share with you quite a few more things. You ready, Reg?
Just a second, yeah.
Hopefully, hopefully.
I'm having better luck with the computer than they did.
The proving grounds, that's right.
Nice try, Rich.
Thanks, buddy.
Always stress as well.
You teach Rich how to operate that.
He's making you look bad.
It's not hard.
Not yet.
He lost it.
Scroll to the top, Reg.
So here we go.
Yeah.
Passed it.
I never look bad.
Okay, Rich, you can start telling your song and dance.
I asked Andy User if he had his tap sheet here today. Never. It's coming up. There we go. There we go. Okay.
Can you see?
Thank you for the opportunity. So, we're going to take a little bit different approach. The approach that we're going to use is that we're going to try and tell you a little bit about the Northwest region and what's unique to the region. Actually, a lot of people aren't aware, but the Pennsylvania Game Commission actually has its roots in the Northwest region. Back in Corey, Pennsylvania, H.A. Penrose assembled some gentlemen to form the Pennsylvania State Sportsmen's Association. And this was back on August 1990. And out of that, the Board of Commissioners was enacted by Act 187 in 1895. There was a historical marker that was actually placed in Corey, and that was back in 2008. And if you go up there, you can find that today. In 1898, Dr. Joseph Kalpas was appointed the first executive secretary and was considered the first chief protector that the board put in place. Another distinction that the Northwest region has, and unfortunately a sad one, is that we lost the first officer in the line of duty. Seeley Houck, who was believed to be about 50 years of age, was killed in Hillsville, Pennsylvania, in Lawrence County on March 2nd of 1906. He had a barely distinguishable grave at Greenwood Cemetery. And in I believe it was September of 95, the officers from Conservation Officers of Pennsylvania Association, COPA, placed a marker because Mr. Houck was not believed to have had any living relatives. So we did a ceremony and placed a proper grave marker at that site. Another thing that you might not be familiar with, depending on how long you're with the agency, is that the Northwest region had the first school in the world for training conservation officers. It started as a hunting camp. And this facility, which was located in Brockway, Ross Leffler School of Conservation was located in Brockway, opened in 1932 and was open until 1986. Graduated 19 classes, which still remain in service. And this is another area where this is the former site of the training school where there's now a memorial rock in place. And we had a ceremony up there in 2014 where we placed another historic marker along the road to the entrance of that training school. Here we are in Bill Bauer out there. Chad was actually a student with Bill, so it was only fitting that these two were in that picture. And as you can see, that is right along the road there at the entrance to the former Ross Leffler School of Conservation before we moved it. Northwest is noted for a lot of firsts. We happen to have the first millionth acre of game lands. That's not exactly the best. It was placed the following year. And some of you may recognize yourself and remember that particular event. Fortunately, the weather cooperated with us that day. The Northwest region is noted for bald eagles. We happen to have, in the early 1980s, the last two known nests of bald eagles in Pennsylvania. They were located in Crawford County. And you can see, we really wanted somebody that has some experience there. Chris has a hood on the bird, and you can see those talons are very formidable. This we did in cooperation with the Elwood City Fire Department. We needed a ladder truck. This nest happened to be right on the edge of some people's yards. And we were able, with some coordination, to get to the point where we could actually put that bird right back in the nest. Parent looked on, not real happy. The region was once considered peripheral bear area. And today, we have an expanding bear population in much of the region, with bears found in all 10 counties. You know, WCO's handled numerous calls on bears throughout the year. You know, I'm not so sure what we're trapping here, WCO or bear, but he's making it look pretty good. Yeah. But we're looking at Larry Smith with surveying bee damage. Bear can do an awful lot of damage. I wish I had some pictures, but we actually recently had a bear that actually ate a car. It got into the car and the door happened to shut. And you can imagine the outcome was not good. We're not immune from this. We're actually experiencing this. This is a goose nesting device up at Pymatuming. In Pymatuming, we don't have lots of bears in that area, but they found those goose nests and they're doing it, but they put the animal down. Beavers, we talked about beavers earlier today, but they were once on the verge of elimination in the state. They find a stronghold here in the Northwest region, and it's a rare WCO that doesn't have beaver complaints to deal with. Even again on game lands, yeah, we're not immune from being in a position to deal with this on a lot of our impoundments and things from a standpoint of trying to keep that open. And you figured we probably receive greater trapping pressure on state game lands than a lot of areas, and yet we still battle with some beaver problems from time to time. The turkeys have expanded their range in the Northwest over the last 35 years as a result of our highly successful trap and transfer program. You know, these photographs, I might mention that the last couple photographs, and quite a few within this presentation, Jake Dingle is a dispatcher for us in the Northwest region. Jake's hobby is wildlife photography. And if you talk to anybody in the agency, he's responsible for photos in a high percentage of our presentations. He's doing the agency a great service. We continue to learn about turkeys, and this is part of the hen study that we were doing here a couple this happened to be the last day of February, and we were going to rocket net some birds. 13 below zero. So it was taxing at best. Fortunately, the birds didn't make us wait that long. They came to bait pretty quick that morning, and we were able to process those birds and move on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you saw a very in-depth presentation on the piping plover, but it is that we're very proud of having been involved with here in the Northwest. Those two nests, and particularly with the rescue of the one nest where they could artificially be incubated and hatched up in Michigan. That was a lot of coordination with our region employees to get that taken care of. I've never been on a plover roundup, but I can tell you that, you know, with them looking at plovers out there on, right there, awful small thing to try and get herded in. And the ultimate result is they did get the bird and they got it back. Never say never. You know, we get calls on all kinds of things. This critter showed up in the Northwest and was found in Crawford County. And it's actually a wallaby, not native to Pennsylvania, was being illegally, whether they're mechanically removing invasive species, grubbing fence rows that are aged. Even mechanical work continues with cutting in through the winter. Another big thing that's involved with our habitat management crews today is the control of invasive species. So spraying becomes a big part of what they do, trying to control those species. It's probably a little more unique to the Northwest in that you're controlling purple loosestrife. That purple flower looks pretty, but it's a real problem in our wetland areas, and we need to try and control it as best we can. Spraying Phragmites, trying to control that as well. Not in a position that we're trying to kill everything. We do plant. So here we're in a position that we're loading up a hopper with seed to try and get those things planted. Take an awful lot of time. Timbering operations are important to habitat management as well. We all know some of the world's best cherries found in the Northwest, but we do releases to open areas for fruit and mass-producing trees. We do thinnings in areas. A unique thing to the Northwest region is that we are the site of the largest whole tree timber harvest operation to date. This is Game Lands 314, which is located right along the Lake Erie shore. It's an important bird area. It's also an area that we want to manage for early successional habitat, particularly for the woodcock. It's an important resting stop, as well as a number of other birds. This is a picture before any of that harvest took place. You can see a lot of it go into pole stage timber. Very difficult to try and manage that, keep that in that early successional state like that. What they did is they actually went in there with that whole tree harvest and took those trees out of it completely. No tops, no trunks, nothing. It kind of looked like a nuclear bomb hitting whenever you look there. Shane Hoaklander is the land manager for that particular area, and he did a lot of education with the hunting public up there to understand the benefits of this. The big benefit is that we can maintain this now in that early successional habitat. And look at the response. We told them, just wait a couple years. You know, you wait and see the response to that. And they're killing some tremendous bucks in there. It's thick, it's extremely thick, but that's also what wildlife needs. And that habitat definitely responded to that operation. Duck boxes are an important thing in the Northwest and something our wildlife habitat management crews get involved with baking and maintaining. Here we're putting out mallard nesting structures and checking our wood boxes. Wouldn't do wood duck boxes. Wouldn't make much sense to put them out there if we didn't check them for success. And land managers maintain records on that as well. Here we're sharing it with a wasp nest. It's not uncommon to have other species utilize these boxes as well. Wildlife protection is an important job function of the agency. The agency was based on law enforcement whenever it was founded due to dwindling wildlife populations. Here we got Jesse Fish out there working at a crime scene with a metal detector for a casing. Our officers are in a position that they're learning from the Pennsylvania State Police how the aviation unit can assist them with their duties. And we routinely have had operations that we've worked together. We happen to have our own training center in the Northwest at Polk. That allows our officers all to qualify down there in the range.